I buried my husband last week and today my son told me I should consider a nursing home soon. The words echoed in my head, but they didn't seem real. My heart sank, and I couldn't stop the tremor that ran through my hands as I held the phone. It wasn't just the loss of my husband that hurt. It was the way my son, my flesh and blood, could say something like that so casually. Was he really suggesting that I leave the home my husband and I built together? The house where we raised our family? The house where I had spent countless nights cooking, cleaning, and taking care of everything? The house that held every memory of my life, now reduced to something I was no longer needed in? I stared at the phone screen, the silence between us louder than the words I had just heard. "Are you serious?" I whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Mom," he said, his voice distant, detached, like he had already made up his mind. "The house is just too much for you now. Maybe it's time to think about moving somewhere more manageable. You'll be happier. Trust me." A knot twisted in my stomach, and my mind raced back to the days when he was a child, when he would run into my arms after school, when I was the most important person in his life. What happened? Where did that little boy go? And where did this stranger come from? I forced a smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. I tried to steady my breathing to calm the rising panic in my chest. I told him I needed time to think, but I already knew. I already knew that this wasn't just about the house. This wasn't about a better place for me. It was about something else. Something darker. As I sat there, the weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating me with the realization that I wasn't wanted anymore. Not by my son. Not by anyone. The grief of losing my husband was unbearable enough. But now this betrayal? My heart felt heavy, and for a moment I wanted to scream, to yell at him, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I simply nodded, said goodbye, and hung up. I walked into the kitchen feeling a deep emptiness that I couldn't fill, no matter how much I tried. The walls seemed to close in around me as I stood there, alone. I had spent my entire life giving, nurturing, supporting, and now I was being cast aside like an old broken thing. The silence of the house was deafening. The air felt thick with the weight of everything unsaid. I looked out the window, watching the trees sway in the breeze, and for the first time, I wondered if I had truly been invisible all these years. Had I been so consumed with my family that I didn't even see how little I mattered to them? I thought back to the days when my husband and I made plans for the future, the dreams we shared, the hopes we had for our children. But now those dreams felt like distant memories, slipping further and further away. I could hear the faint sound of a car pulling into the driveway, and instinctively, I knew it was John coming home. My son, who had once been my whole world. Now I was left wondering if I had ever really mattered to him at all. The next few days passed in a blur, each one feeling heavier than the last. I woke up early, as I always did, and made the coffee, just as I had when Frank was alive. The house was quieter now, emptier. The space between me and the world felt wider than ever. I moved through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, tidying up, but it all felt like a dream. My hands trembled as I folded the laundry, a feeling I couldn't shake, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on me. I hadn't heard from John since that phone call, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel anymore. Grief, anger, confusion. Everything blended together in a confusing mix. I couldn't understand how he could be so cold. Wasn't I still his mother? Hadn't I raised him, loved him, given everything to him? How had we gotten here? I glanced at the kitchen table where Frank and I used to sit every morning, planning our day, our future. Now the chair across from mine remained empty, a cruel reminder of the life I'd lost. I hadn't even realized how much I depended on that quiet companionship until it was gone. The phone rang, dragging me out of my thoughts. It was John. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering, my heart beating louder than the ringing sound. "Mom!" His voice was flat, as though we hadn't just had the most painful conversation a few days ago. "I need you to start thinking about the future." There it was again, the same cold, detached tone. "I've already started looking into some places for you. Maybe a smaller place. Something manageable for you. I just want what's best for you." His words felt like a slap, even though they were laced with false kindness. He wasn't asking me if I wanted help. He was telling me what he thought was best. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "John," I said, my voice shaking despite myself. I don't need a nursing home. This is my home. Your father and I built this place together. I'm not going anywhere. There was a pause on the other end and I could hear him sigh. Mom, I know this is hard, but you need to be realistic. You can't live here alone. It's too much for you. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of his words cut deep into my chest. You're just trying to get rid of me, aren't you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. A raw truth I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. There was another long pause, and when John spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm trying to help you. Help me. I repeated bitterly. You don't want to help me. You want to take this house. You want everything. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening, and for a brief moment I thought he was going to hang up. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, and then I heard him speak in a clipped tone. I think it's for the best, Mom. I'll talk to you later. He hung up before I could say another word. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling utterly defeated. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. How had it come to this? How had the son I raised, the child I loved with all my heart, turned into a stranger who treated me like an inconvenience? I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to demand answers from him. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in the quiet aftermath of his words, I realized something that broke me even more than his indifference. I was alone. Not just without Frank, but without the family I thought I had. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, my hands resting in my lap. The room felt colder now, as if even the walls could feel the change. I thought back to the days when John was a little boy, running around the house with a wide grin on his face, the boy who needed me for everything. Now he barely spoke to me. I could barely remember the last time he had looked me in the eye and smiled. That boy had been replaced by someone else, someone who saw me as nothing more than a burden. I thought of Rachel, his wife, and a surge of anger rushed through me. She was the one who had encouraged him, who had slowly pulled him away from me. She had never liked the way I held on to him, how I always made sure he had everything he needed. But I had done it all because I loved him. How could she have convinced him to throw me away like this? I felt my hands curl into fists, the hurt and frustration growing inside me. They had taken everything. And now they wanted to take my home too. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I wasn't ready to be cast aside like an old piece of furniture. I had spent years taking care of everyone else, but now it was time to take care of myself. I would fight for my home, for the memories I had with Frank, for the life I had built. I wasn't going to let them take it from me without a fight. The days that followed were a mix of silence and tension, with each passing moment feeling heavier than the last. I spent my time walking around the house, picking up the pieces of a life that seemed to be slipping through my fingers. The floors that Frank and I had refinished together now felt colder beneath my feet, and the walls that had once echoed with laughter now stood silent like witnesses to my heartache. I had always thought this house would be my refuge, my sanctuary. But now it felt like a prison, each room reminding me of what I was losing. I sat at the kitchen table one afternoon, staring at the empty chair where Frank used to sit. I ran my fingers over the worn wood, the grain that had been smoothed down over the years, just like the years we spent together. It felt like everything I had known was being erased, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. The phone rang, and I hesitated for a moment before answering. It was John again. Mom, he said, his voice cold, just like it had been the last time we spoke. I think it's time we start looking at some options for you. I don't want you to be alone anymore. It's just not safe. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I kept my voice steady. I don't need your help, John, I replied, trying to sound calm. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. There was a pause and I could almost hear him sigh. Mom, I've already talked to Rachel. We found some places you might like. It'll be good for you. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't let him hear it. Rachel? I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. She's part of this too? She's just concerned, Mom, John said quickly. We both are. It's not about the house. It's about your health. You can't keep living here alone. I could feel my patience beginning to wear thin. I'm fine, I said, my voice trembling despite myself. I don't need to be taken care of. I'm not some helpless old woman. I'm just trying to help, Mom, John said, his voice softer now. I know this is hard, but I'm doing what's best for you. The words stung, but I swallowed them down. I don't want to talk about this right now, John, I said, my tone final. We'll talk later. I hung up before he could say anything more. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, and the weight of his words sinking in. I felt like I was drowning in them. I had always been there for him, always put him first, and now he was trying to push me out of my own life. I didn't know how things had gotten so bad. But as the days went on, I started to see things more clearly. It wasn't just about the house. It was about control. John and Rachel had been planning this for a long time. They had made up their minds, and I was just a roadblock to their plans. It wasn't just that they didn't want me in the house anymore. It was that they wanted everything I had worked for, everything Frank and I had built. And I wasn't going to let them have it. I spent the next few days quietly making my plans. I called the lawyer who had handled Frank's will, the one who had been there for us when we needed him. I knew he would be able to help me figure out what to do next. I couldn't let John and Rachel take everything from me without a fight. I wasn't going to give up my home, my memories, without doing everything I could to hold on to them. As the lawyer went over the details of Frank's will, I was reminded of how carefully we had planned everything. Frank had always been meticulous, always thinking ahead. And now I realized he had planned for this moment too. The will was clear. I had the right to stay in the house, to keep everything that was mine. But it wasn't just about the legal rights. It was about my dignity, my sense of self-worth. I had raised John, I had loved him with everything I had. And now I was being discarded like an old piece of furniture. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let them win. I spent the next few days gathering all the paperwork, getting everything in order. I wasn't sure what John and Rachel would do when they found out I wasn't going anywhere. But I knew I had to be prepared. I wasn't going to let them take my home. And I wasn't going to let them take my life. As the days turned into weeks, I started to feel a sense of strength that I hadn't known I still had. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just a widow anymore, a mother abandoned by her son. I was Margaret Thompson, and I wasn't going to let anyone push me out of the life I had built. It was time to fight back. The day John and Rachel came over to visit was the day I decided I wouldn't back down anymore. I had spent the last few weeks preparing, gathering all the necessary documents, and making sure everything was in order. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. They had come into my life, taken what they wanted, and now they were trying to push me out. It was time for me to stand up for myself. When they arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the very place where Frank and I had shared so many quiet meals together. I had always imagined that this place would be where I would live out my years, surrounded by the memories of the life we had built. But now everything felt different. As soon as John stepped through the door, I could tell he was uncomfortable. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around the room as if he wasn't sure if he belonged here anymore. Rachel, on the other hand, walked in with the same air of entitlement she always had. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, Mom," John said, his voice strained. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air, but I wasn't going to let them dictate the pace. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small. Rachel chimed in with a forced cheerfulness. "I've been looking into some places for you. I think you'd really like the one I found. It's small, cozy, and there's a community of people your age. It'll be perfect for you." I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Perfect for me?" I repeated, my voice calm but laced with sarcasm. "How would you know what's perfect for me, Rachel?" She looked taken aback, but I wasn't done. "You've barely been here to visit me in the last few years. You and John have made it clear that you don't want me around. Now you're telling me what's best for me? Is this how you think it works? You get to decide what's best for me while you take everything I've built." John shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between Rachel and me. I could see the guilt starting to creep into his expression, but he quickly masked it with a defensive tone. "Mom, we're just trying to help. You don't need to be alone in this big house. It's too much for you now." "Too much for me?" I repeated, standing up from the table. "You think it's too much for me to live here, in the house your father and I built together?" The house where you grew up. Rachel crossed her arms, her smile faltering. We're not saying you can't stay here, but maybe it's time to think about the future. The future? I snapped. What future do I have left if I'm not even allowed to stay in my own home? The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything I had been feeling for the past few weeks. John looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and guilt. We're not trying to push you out, Mom. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me? I said, my voice trembling with anger. What's best for me is to stay here, in my home with my memories. What's best for me is to be treated with respect, not like some old burden that needs to be shoved away. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop her. I've had enough of this, I said, my voice steady now. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and it's not going to work. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the envelope I had been holding onto for days. I placed it on the table in front of them, watching as their eyes widened when they saw it. What's this? John asked, his voice hesitant. It's the legal documents from Frank's will, I said. The ones that show that I have the right to stay in this house, no matter what either of you think. I watched as the reality of what I was saying began to sink in. John looked at Rachel, his face pale. You knew about this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel remained silent, her eyes darting nervously. I did, I replied, my voice firm. I know everything. You can't just take this from me, John. And you, Rachel, you can't manipulate him into thinking I don't deserve to live here. There was a long silence as they processed what I had said. Finally, John looked at me, his expression softening. Mom, I didn't know. I didn't realize how much this house meant to you. I just thought. He trailed off, struggling for the right words. You just thought I wouldn't fight back, I said, my voice calm but resolute. But you're wrong. I'm not going to let you take everything from me. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, but I could see the guilt in her eyes now. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. It's over, I said. You can't take my home. You can't take my life. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but I had won this battle. I had taken back control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. The next few days felt like a waiting game. John and Rachel had retreated, and for a moment there was peace in the house. But it wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind of silence that presses in on you, suffocating you with its weight. I spent my days cleaning, cooking, trying to keep my mind occupied, but the emptiness that filled every corner of the house seemed to be growing with each passing hour. The memories of Frank were everywhere, and every little thing I did seemed to bring me back to him. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the air. The picture frames we had arranged together still sat on the mantel, their edges smooth from years of dusting. The memories I once cherished now felt like chains, holding me in place, reminding me of what I had lost. I couldn't escape the feeling that my life was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But then, as I sat in the living room, looking out the window at the trees swaying gently in the breeze, something changed. I realized I didn't have to just sit back and let them take everything from me. I didn't have to let John or Rachel decide my future. This was my life, my home, and I wasn't going to let them rob me of it without a fight. I started making phone calls, setting things in motion. I contacted the lawyer again, asking him to help me secure my rights. I needed to make sure everything was in order, that no one could come in and take what was mine. I wasn't going to be bullied or manipulated into giving up the life I had built. I had spent years making this house a home, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The days felt longer now, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders, but I didn't care. I knew I was doing the right thing. I wasn't going to let John or Rachel control me anymore. I wasn't going to be pushed aside like an old, useless thing. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was going to fight for everything I had worked for. I made plans, set appointments with the lawyer, and started looking into my options. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my dignity, my independence. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small. I wasn't going to let them take away everything I had left. As the days passed, I started to feel a sense of power return to me. The house still felt empty without Frank, but now there was a new energy in it. I was taking control and I could feel it. I wasn't just sitting back and letting life pass me by. I was doing something about it. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. One morning a week later John called again. His voice was different this time. It wasn't the cold, detached tone he had used before. There was something softer in it, a hint of hesitation. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, and I realize I've been too hard on you. Maybe I pushed you too far. I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. For a moment I just stood there, the words hanging in the air between us. I had waited so long for him to say something like this, but now that it was happening, I didn't know if I could believe it. "I don't need your apology, John," I said, my voice steady. "What I need is for you to understand that I don't need to be taken care of. I'm not a child, and I'm not some old woman who needs to be put out to pasture." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to respond. But then he spoke again, his voice softer now. "I understand, Mom, and I'll do better. I promise." I didn't know if I could trust him, but for the first time in a long while I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. I wasn't going to let my guard down completely, but this was a start. After I hung up the phone, I sat down at the kitchen table and thought about everything that had happened. It had been a long, difficult journey, but I had made it through. I had taken back control of my life, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe again. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I was ready for them. I wasn't going to let anyone take what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel like I didn't matter. I had a long road ahead of me, but I was ready to face it. As the days passed, I began to see subtle changes in John. He started visiting more often, calling to check on me, even offering to help with things around the house. Rachel, too, seemed to soften a little, though I still kept my distance. I wasn't sure if I could trust her, but I wasn't going to let her push me around anymore. I had learned the hard way that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had learned how to stand up for myself, how to fight for what I deserved. And I wasn't going to stop now. As the weeks passed, life began to return to a rhythm, but the weight of everything that had happened was never far from my mind. I had managed to hold my ground with John, and there was a tentative peace between us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the way he and Rachel had treated me. I tried to push the anger down, tried to focus on the future, but the reality of their betrayal still stung. I couldn't help but feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The house felt more like my home again, but it was hard to ignore the small changes that had happened. Things I had once shared with Frank now felt out of place, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I had to remind myself every day that I was still here, that I was still in control. But control was a funny thing. It wasn't as simple as signing a few papers or having a conversation with John. It was about more than just the house. It was about reclaiming who I was, and I didn't know if I could fully do that. One afternoon I was sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album, when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was cautious as I got up to answer it. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Rachel standing there, a hesitant look on her face. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, her voice almost uncertain. I couldn't remember the last time she had addressed me like that. She was always so sure of herself, so quick to take control. I stood there for a moment, not sure how to respond. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been thinking," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "and I want to apologize. I know things have been difficult and I've been selfish. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for how I've treated you." I stared at her, trying to read her expression, trying to figure out if this was genuine or just another manipulation. But there was something in her eyes, something different that made me hesitate. I had spent so many years seeing through her facade, but now I wasn't sure what to believe. "Why now?" I asked. "Why the sudden change of heart?" She took a deep breath and seemed to gather her thoughts before speaking. "I don't want to lose my family, Margaret. I've been too focused on what I thought I wanted, and I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. And John, he needs you. He doesn't know how to say it, but he's been struggling. I've been too hard on both of you." The words were unexpected, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Rachel had always been the one to push for control, to manipulate every situation to her advantage. But now there was a softness to her that I had never seen before. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You've hurt me too many times. I can't just forget that." She nodded, her expression sincere. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to try to make things right. I want to be a better person, a better daughter-in-law." I didn't know if I believed her, but part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to believe that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person who had tried to push me out of my own life. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever truly trust her again. "I'll think about it," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But don't expect everything to change overnight." She smiled, a small, tentative smile, and nodded. "I understand. I just want to do better." She turned to leave but then stopped. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on us." I didn't respond right away. I just watched as she walked away, closing the door behind her. The house felt quieter again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I had felt before. It was the silence of something unresolved, something hanging in the air. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive Rachel, or if I ever would be. But for the first time I felt like there was a chance for something different. I didn't have to give up my home. I didn't have to give up on myself. And maybe, just maybe, things could start to heal. I spent the next few days thinking about what Rachel had said. Her apology was unexpected, but it was also the first time she had shown any vulnerability. I didn't know if it was enough to change everything between us, but it was a start. John, too, had started to visit more often. He still had that same guarded look in his eyes, but there was something softer about him now. He wasn't so quick to push me away. He came by one evening to help with some small repairs around the house. It wasn't much, but it was something. And it was a far cry from the cold distance that had defined our relationship for so long. I could tell he was trying in his own way. Maybe he wasn't the son I remembered, the one who used to turn to me for everything, but he was still my son. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the power to shape it. I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. I still had my home, my memories, and the strength to rebuild what had been broken. And for that I was grateful. The days turned into weeks, and the uneasy peace that had settled in the house felt fragile, like the calm before a storm. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the sense of looming uncertainty. John and Rachel's visits had become more frequent, but I still kept my distance. There was a part of me that wanted to believe things could go back to normal, but I couldn't forget the way they had treated me. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the years of being overlooked, the years of giving and giving, only to be discarded when they no longer needed me. One evening after a long day, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring at the fading light as the sun set behind the trees. The house, still so full of memories, felt quieter than ever. Frank's absence was a constant weight, but there was something else now, something I hadn't been able to name before. It was a feeling of betrayal, of being cast aside, and it gnawed at me deep in my chest. But I couldn't let it consume me. I had spent too much of my life caring for others, always putting my family first, always sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. But now I was tired. I wasn't going to give up this time. I wasn't going to let them win. The sound of the doorbell broke my thoughts, and I stood up, walking inside to answer it. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see John standing there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked different somehow, a bit more humbled, like the weight of everything that had happened had finally caught up with him. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, his voice softer than I'd heard in weeks. "Can we talk?" I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the familiar surroundings, as if seeing them for the first time in a long while. We both stood there for a moment, neither of us sure where to begin. Finally he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day. About the house, about everything." He paused, his gaze meeting mine. "I've been a terrible son, Mom. I've been so focused on what I thought I wanted that I didn't see what was right in front of me." I blinked, taken aback by his words. This wasn't the same John who had brushed me aside, who had treated me like a burden. There was sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe he had finally realized the hurt he had caused. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. I've always been so caught up in my own life, but I should have been there for you. I should have been better. I felt a tightness in my chest as I looked at him. For so long I had wanted him to say these things, to acknowledge the pain he had caused, but hearing it now didn't make it any easier. It's not just about the house, John, I said softly, my voice steady. It's about everything. You and Rachel pushed me out of your lives like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. He looked down, his face flushing with shame. I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I didn't see it before, but I see it now. And I want to make things right. I don't know if you can, I said, the words heavier than I expected. You've hurt me in ways I don't know if I can forgive. But I'm willing to try for your sake. For our sake. There was silence between us for a long moment, and in that silence I realized something. I didn't have to forget the past, but I could choose to move forward. I could choose to forgive, not for their sake but for mine. I don't want to live in the past anymore, I said quietly. I want to start fresh, but that's going to take time. I'm not going to trust you right away, but I'm willing to try. John nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at his lips. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I want to make it right. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could be different. Maybe there was still a chance for us to rebuild what had been broken. But I wasn't going to rush it. Trust had been shattered, and it would take time to put the pieces back together. As John left that night, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over it. I wasn't just the mother who had been cast aside. I was Margaret Thompson, and I wasn't going to let anyone define my worth. The next few weeks passed slowly, but with each day I felt myself getting stronger. John and Rachel continued to visit, and while things were still awkward, there was a sense of progress. John made an effort to help around the house, and Rachel, while still distant, seemed to be trying as well. But I wasn't letting my guard down completely. I had learned the hard way not to trust too easily. I spent more time taking care of myself, finding new hobbies and reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in years. It felt good to have something for myself again, to not be defined by my role as a mother or a wife. I was rediscovering who I was, and it felt like the first step toward reclaiming my life. John still called, still checked in on me, and while I didn't always pick up the phone, I appreciated the effort. I wasn't sure if things would ever go back to the way they were, but I was beginning to believe that maybe they didn't have to. Maybe we could find a new way to be family. I wasn't ready to forget the past, but I was ready to move forward. And that was enough for me. It had been a few months since the tension between John, Rachel, and I had started to ease. Things were still far from perfect, but they were different. The awkwardness had started to fade, replaced by a tentative understanding. John and Rachel continued to visit, and while there were still moments of discomfort, there was a sense that we were all trying in our own ways to make things right. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea, the sound of the front door opening caught my attention. It was John, walking in with a hesitant smile on his face. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, looking a bit unsure of how to approach me. I looked up from my book and smiled back. John, how was your day?" He shrugged slightly as he walked toward the couch and sat down. "It was okay. Just thought I'd stop by and check in on you. I know things have been, well, a little strange lately." I could tell he was trying to make light of the situation, but there was a seriousness behind his words. I set my book aside and nodded. "It's been a little strange for all of us, but I think we're making progress." John looked at me for a moment, his gaze lingering as though he was searching for something in my eyes. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realized something. I haven't been a very good son. I've let things go too far, and I don't want to lose you." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened to him. This wasn't the same John who had once brushed me aside, the one who had seemed so detached, so unwilling to acknowledge my feelings. There was a sincerity in his words now, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "John, I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But I appreciate you saying that. I've been hurt, and it's going to take time for me to heal." He nodded, His eyes filled with regret. I understand. I know I can't just fix things with a few words, but I want to try. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I've already lost so much. I don't want to lose the only family I have left. I stared at him for a moment, trying to process what he had said. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was exactly what I had been hoping for. I had wanted him to understand the pain he had caused, to realize how deeply his actions had hurt me. And now, for the first time, it seemed like he did. We've both made mistakes, I said quietly. But I'm willing to try. I'm not saying everything is going to be fixed overnight, but I'm willing to work on it. John smiled, the weight in his expression lifting slightly. That means a lot to me, Mom. I just want to be there for you like I should have been all along. The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it was a start. And that was enough for me. In the weeks that followed, John came over more often. We spent time talking, sharing memories, and slowly rebuilding the bond that had been damaged. There were still moments of awkwardness, but they were fewer and farther between. Rachel also started to visit more frequently, though I still kept my distance from her. She hadn't earned my trust yet, and I wasn't willing to give it to her just because she had apologized. But I did notice small changes in her. She seemed more considerate, more aware of my feelings. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. The house began to feel a little less empty. The silence wasn't as suffocating anymore, and I found myself looking forward to John's visits, to the small moments of connection we were rebuilding. It wasn't the family we had once been, but it was something, and that was more than I could have hoped for a few months ago. One afternoon I sat down at the kitchen table, flipping through a photo album I had found while cleaning the attic. There were pictures of John as a child, pictures of Frank and me, all the memories that had once felt
so solid, so unshakable.
Now they felt bittersweet. I missed Frank terribly, but I also knew I had to move forward. I had to keep living, keep fighting for the life I deserved. I had to stop letting the past control me. As I flipped through the pages, I thought about everything I had been through. How much I had lost, but also how much I had gained. I had learned to stand up for myself, to fight for what was mine, and most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to make a change. Later that evening, John came over again. We sat in the living room talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying each other's company. It felt good to laugh, to share a moment of peace without the weight of the past hanging over us. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly seeing my son again. Not the man who had pushed me away, but the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved. The road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew there would be more challenges to face. But I also knew that I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't going to let the past define me. I was going to write my own story, and I was going to make sure it was one worth living. As the months passed, I began to feel a sense of quiet resolve. The healing process wasn't linear, but I could feel the pieces falling into place. John and I had started rebuilding our relationship, and while I still didn't fully trust Rachel, I couldn't deny that there were small moments of change. John had made a commitment to do better, and though I wasn't sure what the future held, I was starting to believe that he was trying. We had spent time together, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes sharing stories about the past, about Frank, about the days when things were simpler. It was strange how the small moments, the ones we used to take for granted, began to mean more now. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, a slight breeze brushing against my face, I realized something. I had spent so much of my life caring for others, always putting their needs above my own. I had been a mother, a wife, a caretaker. But now I was just Margaret. I wasn't defined by my roles anymore. And that thought brought me a sense of peace I hadn't known I needed. I had been through so much, and now for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living for myself. The doorbell rang, breaking me from my thoughts, and I stood up, walking toward the door. When I opened it, I saw John standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "I thought you might like these." I smiled, my heart swelling with a mix of emotions. "Thank you, John," I said, taking the flowers from him. "You didn't have to do this." He shrugged, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting my eyes. "I wanted to," he said quietly. "I know things have been tough, but I want you to know I'm here for you. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I just want you to know that I love you." I'm sorry for everything I put you through. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had wanted to hear this for so long, but now that it was finally being said, I wasn't sure what to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive him, wanted to believe that everything could go back to normal. But another part of me was still holding on to the hurt, still feeling the weight of the years I had spent feeling invisible. I took a deep breath, letting the emotions settle before responding. I know, John, I said softly. I know you're sorry. And I'm willing to try, but it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. He nodded, his expression sincere. I understand, Mom. I just want to do better. I don't want to lose you again. I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, and for the first time I believed him. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice steady. But I need you to understand that I'm not the same woman I was before. I'm not just your mother anymore. I'm Margaret, and I have to take care of myself too. He smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for a moment, everything felt okay. We didn't have to fix everything right away. We didn't have to pretend that everything was fine, but we could move forward one step at a time. The days that followed were still filled with small challenges. Rachel and I hadn't fully reconciled, but there was a shift. I could see her making an effort, trying to bridge the gap, even if it was slow. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. I didn't know if we would ever return to the way things were, but I was learning that maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe what mattered now was finding a new way to be a family, to rebuild what had been broken. John continued to visit, sometimes helping around the house, sometimes just sitting with me, sharing a quiet moment. He still wasn't the son I remembered, the one who had always been there for me, but he was trying. And that was enough for me. I had learned that I couldn't force things. I couldn't force forgiveness, and I couldn't force trust. But I could choose to move forward. And moving forward meant giving myself the grace to heal, the space to breathe, and the ability to embrace whatever came next. I spent more time with friends, reconnecting with people I had lost touch with over the years. I started gardening again, something Frank and I used to do together. It felt good to have something to nurture, something to care for that wasn't weighed down by the past. As I tended to the plants, I realized that I was doing the same thing with my own life. I was nurturing it, giving it the attention it needed to grow. Slowly, I started to see the changes both in myself and in my relationship with John. There were still days of uncertainty, moments when I doubted the progress we had made, but there were more good days than bad. And that was enough for now. The house no longer felt like a place of sorrow. It was becoming a place of peace, a place where I could finally breathe. The memories of Frank were still there, but they didn't suffocate me anymore. They reminded me of the love we had shared, the life we had built, and the strength I had found in the aftermath of everything. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face it. I had learned to stand up for myself, to protect what was mine, and most importantly, to embrace the life I still had. And that was something I would never take for granted again.